I was here at the Opry and on the Opry the night he made his first appearance here. The story about his doing 5 encores is true. I stood in the wings and watched that, and he finally just had to walk off. They wouldn't sit down and shut up. But I was in Shreveport, Louisiana on the Louisiana Hayride in 1951, and he kind of acted up here at the Opry, and they fired him. So he came back down there, and I became much better acquainted with him there than I did here in Nashville. But on Saturday night, we had a nice restaurant there with a back room that most of the cast from the Hayride would gather, and we'd commune and visit. And I did a lot of touring with Hank, the package shows. Back in the 40s, when he was first here, there was a promoter called Les Hutchins. And rather than have 4 or 5 groups in individual cars, he would charter a trailway bus and put them all on so that they'd be showing up at the same time. No bunks, no beds. You just rode in the seats and caught a nap here and there. But we was out on 20-day tours with Hank, Lonzo and Oscar, Jimmy Dickens, and Monroe's band. That was quite a show. And we played everywhere from Minneapolis to Lake Charles, Louisiana. And it was quite an experience. In fact, Bill and I were awake on the bus one night and helped Hank write I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. We never got any credit for it, but we had a few lines.
What lines did you guys add?
Oh, I don't remember. Hank had it started. You're that lonesome whippoorwill, so blue that I could cry.
Do you remember whereabouts you guys were when?
We were going from Minneapolis to Lake Charles, I believe. It was an overnight gig.
Was there drinking on that bus?
Well, Dickens and some of the guys had it, but I never saw Hank take a drink. Never did. Toured with him all those times in the Shreveport. Now, I know some of those horror stories are true because he was a binge drinker, apparently. But I never saw him. I've seen him refuse it, turn it down because he knew if he had one, he'd continue. But I never saw the man take a drink. I never saw him rude to anyone. Great sense of humor, very professional, very real. That was his secret. He was just himself, you see. He didn't care to be anyone else or make believe he was anyone else, and so talented.
How did he relate to the crowds? Was he really good at live in front of?
His magnetism was unreal. For instance, the Had Call show was a big package show. That Pat Bedison's show, and they had people like Johnny Ray and Bob Hope and Hank Williams and just you name it. And of course, Hope was the big star and was close to the show. But after a couple of nights, he wouldn't follow Hank Williams. Honest to God, Hank had to close the show because once he got out there, that was it. Oh, that's true. Very true.
Bob Hope was huge too then.
Oh, yeah. I had the pleasure of working the University of New Mexico with Bob one time, just he and I. And it was a wonderful experience. Yeah.
We never have the opportunity to chat with folks that were
actually knew him. That's true.
So I apologize if I ask a couple more questions about him, but it's very interesting to.
One little thing that I think is noteworthy that amused me, Hank and Jimmy Davis, ex-governor of Louisiana, were out on Caddo Lake in Shreveport. They're fishing, one in each end of the boat with their backs to each other. And Hank was in his cups pretty good. And Jimmy said he was fishing. He kept looking out on the water. There was money floating around all over. And he didn't know where it was coming from. And he looked up. Hank was fishing for his cigarette lighter and pulling money out and just throwing it in the creek. That's a true story. Yeah.
Did you ever spend any time around Miss Audrey?
Oh yeah, I went to a lot of her house parties when they lived out there on Brentwood. Yeah, I was invited to those a number of times. They were something else, I'll tell you that. Huge crowds. I'd leave early because they could get pretty raunchy, you know. Yeah.
Who were some of the people that might show up to those parties?
Oh gosh, just anybody. I remember Rex Allen's son was always there, and well, most of the notables in Nashville were invited. You know, Hank hated their parties. One time, this is supposed to be a true story as well. She was throwing a big dinner to impress businessmen that she thought she should impress, and Hank again was in his cups pretty good. Came down and sat at the head of the table, and she was forcing him to do it because presenting him, you see. When they passed the mashed potatoes, he just got a handful and put them on his plate. He blew that party. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he brought Ray Price to Nashville. Hank did. Met him in Texas. And for lack of a better place to live, Ray and his wife lived upstairs at Hank's house. Well, Hank would get in his cups and take his pistol and shoot the wall and shoot up through the floor. So Ray, his wife, was scared to death. So Ray went down to Mr. Cooper at the Union and asked if it wasn't something he could do to get Hank to stop shooting his pistol in the house. Mr. Cooper said, I got nothing to do with him shooting his pistol in the house. Hey, gosh.
When you were doing these package shows, I'm guessing his talents were obvious, but did you have any idea that his music would live on as long as it has?
Oh, I wasn't a bit surprised. In fact, had his career been long, he died right at the height of his career. And he's still a monster. I'm telling you, Barry Comos and people like that who were my big favorites come and go, but Hank's still is very visible, you know. Yeah.
Can you tell me how you heard about his passing?
Yep, very well. I wasn't around him too much when he was having that severe back problem and such, but I was doing an early morning radio show in Baltimore, Maryland for a car dealer down on Lafayette Street. It had a 7 o'clock show that was remoted over a local radio station. And I went down that New Year's morning to do my radio show, and they announced that they found him dead in his car in Oak Hill. And it just stunned me, even though I knew he was in bad health. I didn't expect that, you see. They took him back to Montgomery to bury him. That's where the big service was, you know. He was the first guy, Jim Denny was booking him. He was the first, it was nearly all percentage jobs back then, or small guarantees, you see. But Hank was the first guy out of Nashville, to my knowledge, that could demand $1,000 a day in the early 50s. And
that's a lot of money in the early 50s.
It was back then, indeed so. But to give you an example of his drawing power, I worked Sunset Park a lot off of my show in Baltimore. It was one of the larger entertainment parks in Pennsylvania. And the old gentleman came to me. I had my first records out and made a deal with me that I'd play his park every Sunday that I wasn't booked somewhere else. And that summer I played those parks 26 consecutive Sundays. Well, the first date that Hank got the $1,000 for was at the Sunset Park. They never did get them all in. His night show was over and he was leaving, and people were still lined up trying to get in the park. That's how fabulous he was, you know. In traffic jams, they couldn't turn around and leave because the road is too narrow, you know.
I guess my last question is, when you talked about how Bill Monroe was, did he feel threatened by Hank Williams on these package shows, or did they get along?
No, they got along, and each one was a powerhouse in his own right, and they respected each other. Like I say, I did a lot of package shows with Hank, and I can't remember any occasion where that there was professional jealousy. One little incident I'd like to share. It was customary back then when we had those package shows that you wouldn't feature any of the artist's material on your portion of the show. Well, I had learned 6 More Miles from Molly O'Day and had forgotten that it was written by Hank, And we were in Minneapolis again, and I went out and did my portion ahead of him, and he was standing in the wings to come on. And without thinking, I did 6 more miles. And when I came off, I was embarrassed to death because I remembered it was his. But his comment was very left-handed complimentary. He said, "I'll never do that GD song again." He liked the way I did it,